Hello everyone and welcome to the second of our HipFest at Home online presentations for 2023. My name is Alison Strauss and I am the director of the Hippodrome Silent Film Festival and the programmer of the Hippodrome year round. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to give you a bit of housekeeping before we get properly started. There are subtitles available by clicking the CC icon in the YouTube video player. And if you are joining this presentation for the online premiere on the 20th of February, and if you'd like to ask our speaker, Christine Leteux, a question, you can do that, or you can put a comment in the chat box. And I'm delighted to say that Christine has kindly agreed to watch along as this talk goes live. And so she's going to endeavour to respond to any messages in the chat throughout the presentation. So do keep an eye on those comments as they feed through. That's the practicalities out of the way. I am so thrilled that this HipFest at Home series means that we once again have the chance to welcome an international speaker to our programme lineup. Christine Leteux is a film historian based in Paris. She is the author of esteemed books, including Albert Capellani, Pioneer of the Silent Screen, with a foreword by Kevin Brownlow, and Continental Films, French Cinema Under German Control, with a foreword by Bertrand Tavernier, which was awarded the Best French Film Book Prize by the Syndicate of French Film Critics. In 2015, Christine's biography of Maurice Tourneur was published in France, and as well as translating many of her own works, she is the translator of several books by Kevin Brownlow, including every silent film fan's Bible, The Parade's Gone By. As well as these achievements, Christine also maintains a blog called Anne Harding's Treasures, in which Christine presents for her readers films that are, as she says, part of my personal treasure. I'm delighted that Christine was willing to be part of HipFest 23, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what she can tell us about Maurice Tourneur, the director of our opening night film, The Bluebird. So now it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Christine Leteux.
First of all, I'd like to thank the HipFest for this great opportunity to talk about Maurice Tourneur, a director that was really important in the teens, on both sides of the Atlantic, because he was one of the pioneers who really created modern filmmaking and invented so many new things, in editing and filmmaking. So I'm going to take you through a journey, on both sides of the Atlantic to discover the life of this great director. Maurice Tourneur was born Maurice Thomas in a lower middle class family in Paris on the 2nd of February 1876. And he was the eldest, of 3 siblings. He had a brother and a sister. And when he selected, a stage name, he decided to call himself Tourneur, simply because Thomas actually in slang, in French slang, means chamber pot. So to avoid the mockery, he decided to take the name Tourneur. And funnily enough, his brother, Robert Tourneur, Robert Thomas, decided also to take this name, as a stage name when he became an actor. And his sister, Yvonne, also took a stage name, Yvonne Mirval. Maurice became an apprentice with a painter called Adrien Karbowski. Karbowski was a pupil of Puvis-Chavannes, which is probably why in many biographies people say that Tourneur worked with Puvis-Chavannes, but in actual fact, I think he only worked with Karbowski. And Karbowski had been commissioned to decorate a town hall outside Paris, Nogent-sur-Marne, a small town east of Paris. And he participated in the painting, of this wall, what you can see here, called Rest and Navigation. And if you look on the left-hand corner, I've put a little square, and there's a young man with a easel. And this young man with a easel actually is Maurice. So not only did he participate in the painting, but he was also a model for the painter. So you can see him here, you know, painting, and there is a photograph beside it, so which really shows that it's definitely him. So he worked as a painter until he had to join the army, you know, as a conscript. And when he came back in 1900, he decided to go for the theater. So he gave up completely painting and he became an actor. And first he was working, you know, in small touring companies, you know, in provincial France. And then one day he got lucky, and Gabrielle Réjeanne, the actress you see here, which was very famous at the time, you know, she was only second to Sarah Bernard in terms of fame, you know, across the world. She took him, you know, as a stage manager for a tour in South America, where he learned, you know, his trade. And later on, he got even luckier because he became stage manager to André Antoine, who was really the big man of the theater, the great innovator of the time. And he learned from him, you know, everything there was to know about directing actors. During the tour with the Antoine troupe, you know, he met an actress called Van Doren. You see her here. Her real name was Fernande Petit, and they fell in love. So he married her, and they got a child, an only son, Jacques Thomas, who would become later the director Jacques Tourneur. Around 1912, Maurice started working in the cinema. We don't know exactly the year, but I mean, at first he was probably working as an extra, you know, just to make, you know, a bit of money. But later on, he became an assistant to Émile Chotard, who was an important director from the Eclair company. In France at the time, there was 3 big companies, the biggest being Pathé, the second Gaumont, and Eclair was the third in terms of output. And it's probably around the summer of 1913 that Maurice became a director. And this is the poster of one of the films he made at the time. It's a detective story, you know, after Émile Gaboriau, quite typical of the output of Eclair. Here is one of the films, another film he made for Eclair. It's in English, it would translate as Wax Figures. A man has decided to make a bet with his friends that he can spend the whole night inside a wax figure museum, you know, but not just a wax figure museum. It's also some kind of a horror chamber, you know, like in Madame Tussauds. And the guy goes mad during the night. He thought he could, you know, take it, but he can't. He made another even more horrific picture. Unfortunately, that one is lost, like many of the Eclair films. It's an adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe, The System of Dr. Tarr and Professor Feather, where inmates from the lunatic asylum actually attack their doctor, you see, and they are about to operate on it. And apparently the film was so horrific that the woman who worked as cutters for the studio actually fainted during a preview. And it's around at the beginning of 1914 that the Eclair studio realized that Maurice could speak some English, and decided to send him to the USA to work for the American subsidiary company of Eclair in Fort Lee. Fort Lee was actually the hub of filmmaking, you know, in 1914. Hollywood had not completely taken over. I mean, a good part of the American production was made in Fort Lee. And if you look at the map, you understand why it was in Fort Lee, because it's very close to Manhattan. You just have to cross the Hudson River. And obviously the land was a lot cheaper. You could build, you know, studios everywhere, and it was very cheap. And also it meant that you could attract easily actors from Broadway, because Manhattan was very close by. So Maurice actually worked for the Peerless World Studio, and here is the picture of the studio and what it looked like in those days. So you see the giant glass house, because at the time in Fort Lee, they used also natural light, not only just artificial light. It was a system that was used, until they moved to Hollywood. So now we're going to watch a clip where you'll be able to see the Paragon Studios, because Maurice made a film in 1916 called A Girl's Folly, where actually he shows filmmaking and how it took place in those days. This is the entrance of the Paragon Studio, where you see the employees arrive in the morning. Now the inside of the studio, where you see several sets, being moved around, where a director is actually directing a sequence. And then the outside of the studio, where there's some kind of a backlot where they're shooting outdoors. And there's a huge platform where one of the operators is taking, a wide angle shot, and numerous extras. And that's it. When Maurice arrived in Fort Lee, actually, there was already a lot of French people working in the studios. The most important one here is Etienne Arnaud at the top. He had been sent to lead, the studio of Éclair in 1911. And later on, Émile Chotard, who had been, the mentor of Tourneur for Éclair in France, actually moved also to Fort Lee in 1915. So did Albert Capellani, who was a big pioneer from Pathé. And in 1917, it's Léonce Perret who came from Gaumont. So why all these directors moved there? Well, it's easy. It's because the war started, and because the war closed all the studios, in France. The directors who were not, at the front decided, that better moved over there. It was some kind of a brain drain, of some of the best directors of France who moved to America at a crucial point. And also, it created, a lot of anger towards Tourneur later on, because he decided to stay in America when the war broke out, unlike Etienne Arnaud, who decided to go back to France to fight. As soon as he arrived, Maurice, decided he needed really a good crew of technicians. And he was very lucky because there was already a lot of really great people over there. I think I've read somewhere in an interview that something like 100 Frenchmen, were working, in the various studios. So he selected, very good cinematographer called John van den Broek, who was from Dutch-German descent, but had worked in France and had studied in France, so he was a French speaker. And he became, the Maurice cinematographer for the next 5 years. He also decided to work with Ben Carré. Well, his real name is Benjamin Carré. He was a painter, but he was mostly an art director in the studio. And also he worked with Tourneur for the next 5 years. And there was also another French cinematographer called Lucien Andriot, who went on working, for a long time, even in Hollywood later on, for RKO, was also really a brilliant cinematographer. This is Maurice's first picture in America. And as you can see, his name is nowhere to be seen, which is normal because in 1914, the name of a director was never mentioned, whether in France or even in America. So he's doing an adaptation of a play coming from Broadway, because most of the director of the company World Film were actually people who came also from the theater, so they own the rights of a lot of plays. And Maurice's idea, which was very unlike what people did at the time, was to use a Whistler painting, famous Whistler painting, which is a portrait of his mother. And he decided to recreate this painting, you know, in the film, and every critic was really impressed by that because he had this artistic background, you know, unlike many other directors. Unfortunately, this picture is lost. With The Wishing Ring, which is his third picture, he made a sensation because suddenly there was a film which was very unlike anything which had been done so far. It's a film which is edited like a modern picture. You get medium shots, reaction shots, and very natural acting. And immediately the critics took notice. Maurice was completely unknown when he arrived in May 1914. But by October, you know, the professional press was talking about him. So now we're going to watch a clip from The Wishing Ring, where you see the son of an earl with his school friends, and they're having a drinking party, and they're making quite a racket, and they're going to get arrested. But take attention at the editing, because this is 1914, at a time in France where all the films were still made in long shot. Maurice went even further with another picture. This is Elias Jimmy Valentine. And the picture you see here was taken during a preview of the film. And this is inside Sing Sing Penitentiary. Because for the film, he asked, you know, the warden to be able to use some of the inmates, you know, to work as extra for the film. So the idea was to have something very naturalistic. So to thank all the inmates, they organized this preview, but not on any day. As you can see, it's the 14th of February, and the 14th of February, that's Valentine's Day. I suspect actually that is a publicity stunt, you know, organized by Louis J. Selznick. You know, David O. Selznick's father was one of the producers and one of the directors of World Film Company. During the year 1914 to 1918, Maurice made 27 features in 46 months. That means one film every 6 weeks. That's an incredible output, even for the time, considering they're all feature films, not shorts. And for Elias Jimmy Valentine, he had this great innovative idea. He had a platform built right underneath the studio roof. And on top of the platform, you see John van den Broek who is cranking, the camera, and Maurice is standing beside him, near that ladder. And the idea was to take a sequence in high angle shots. And this sequence is the various safecrackers which are breaking inside a bank at night. And this is the sequence we are going to watch now. And by the way, this sequence had a huge effect on Fritz Lang because he reused it in some of his pictures later on. So now we're going to watch clip number 3. This is Elias Jimmy Valentine. Some pictures were taken outdoors. This is a shooting of the Cub. This is up the river Hudson, so it's just right outside Fort Lee. And the picture is supposed to take place in Hillbilly Country. And there is a new member in Maurice's crew, which is appearing on this picture. And I'm going to show you that with my magic wand. Here, you've got my laser pointer. This young man sitting under the camera with a white hat is called Clarence Brown. He used to work in cars. He was a car engineer, but because he loves the movies, he decided to quit, and he went to join Maurice's crew. And he was hired in spite of the fact, obviously, he had no training whatsoever, and he's about to learn all his trade with Maurice. And now I would like to show you a clip from The Cub, because it's a very funny comedy. And I've selected the opening credits of the film because it's quite unusual. You get the lead actor is here. This is Johnny Hines, very funny comedian. And he's about to introduce to you all the various members of the cast. And this is now clip number 4 from The Cub. By 1916, Maurice was so important in film that he could attract stars. And this is why House Peters, a British actor who had just become famous with Girl of the Golden West, you know, a Cecil B. DeMille Western shot in California. He decided to leave California and to go back to the East to work with Maurice specifically, and they made 4 pictures together. I mean, House Peters was a very elegant and natural actor. Unfortunately, out of the 4, only 2 fragments have survived of 2 pictures, the Closed Road and the Red Rider. Well, that's really a shame. This is another picture which I think is brilliant to show you how it was like to make films in those days. You know, the film crew is actually very small. You see Maurice, you know, standing on the platform here, directing the actors. There is John Van Den Broek just behind the camera, and there are the 2 Tourneur's assistants. There's George Cole here on the right, and Clarence Brown on the left, and various propmen, and that's about it. So film crew in those days was about 5 people. And this film they're shooting is called The Pawn of Fate. And it's got another actor which was famous at the time called George Beban, who just had a huge success playing the Italian Thomas Harper Hintz production. And this film actually has got a funny story. I mean, it was lost for many years until 3 reels of it were discovered in Dawson City in Yukon, you know, when they dig up underneath an ice rink and they discover treasure troves of films. So unfortunately, only a fragment of that film has survived. By the end of 1916, Maurice was famous enough to be selected by star number 1 in American film, Mary Pickford. she decided she wanted to make 2 pictures with this director. At that time, she had already her own unit, you know, inside Famous Players Lasky, and she decided she wanted Tourneur. So here they are shooting The Pride of the Clan. It's not in Scotland, it's in Marblehead, Massachusetts. Their second film together, Poor Little Rich Girl, was one of Mary's greatest success, as in terms of the public as well as critics. The film is a comedy. Nevertheless, Maurice gave it, you know, a sort of a turn which is rather dark. And we're going to watch a clip from the film where Mary is, as the title says, a girl of a very rich family, but the family doesn't take care of her, and she's been dropped in the care of nasty servants. And one servant gave her a potion full of drugs, and she's having a series of nightmares. And she's meeting a woman wearing a black veil, which is supposed to represent death. So clip number 5, Poor Little Rich Girl. But it's next year, in 1918, when Tourneur made The Bluebird, that he became really at the peak of his profession. He is suddenly considered the equal to D.W. Griffith or Cecil B. DeMille. And why? Because the film is one of the first ones to use systematically special effects, but in a very artistic way. And also is using stylized set, special lighting effect. I mean, Ben Carré manages all the effects with his various sets. And he always has his wonderful cameraman, particularly John Van Den Broek. And remember something, the film is 1918 and he's using stylized set before German Expressionism, which happened only a few years later. So just to show you how important Maurice was, it is the cover of a trade magazine of the time, Motography, and Maurice is on the front cover for The Blue Bird. after the Bluebird, he continued in a similar vein with Prunella, where he wanted to use this cardboard set, you know, to make it look like some kind of a children illustrated book. Unfortunately, I mean, the films were very artistic. You know, the press loved it, but the public didn't. Because also the distributors didn't want to have such arty pictures. So as a result, the films were distributed only, you know, in big cities like New York and nowhere else. By the end of 1918, Maurice created his own production company, and he decided to put on production a film which was again very artistic, very misogynist as well. I mean, something which wouldn't be very PC nowadays, let's say, but I think the film is fabulous, you know, in terms of its artistic content. And Ben Carré really surpassed himself, you know, he recreated, you know, ancient Rome, or, you know, the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. I mean, unfortunately, this film has not been restored so far. I mean, it exists only in really horrid prints. But I nevertheless want to show you a clip from this film because I think it's a very interesting picture. And I've selected the sequence with Messalina. So as you know, Messalina was the wife of Emperor Claudius, and she was not, you know, a very nice lady. You know, she liked to go to the slums of Rome at night to seduce men. And Maurice's great idea for the film was not to take actresses, but to take dancers. And Flora Rivales, who is playing Messalina, was actually from the Ballet Russe. She was a ballet dancer. And I think her acting, you know, as Messalina is absolutely fabulous. The way she seduced, you know, the soldier, as you were going to see in the clips. I mean, I think it's fantastic. Because he wanted it, you know, as some kind of a reply to the vamps, because this is the great years of theater bara, where actresses are overacting like mad. And he thought that was ridiculous. To seduce a man, you better be underacting rather than overacting. So here it is, clip number 6 from Woman. By the end of 1918, Maurice realized that production, on the East Coast was becoming really difficult. Everybody was moving to California because there was the Spanish flu pandemic. There was power cuts. I mean, life in New York was really difficult. So everybody moved to the West Coast, and slowly, Fort Lee became a ghost town. Just to show you how important Maurice had become, he was one of the founding members of the Motion Picture Directors Association. And here you have a picture, of their first meeting in February 1919. So Maurice is underneath that cross here. And you notice I've put a little arrow here to point to this dark man. And you're probably wondering who he is. Well, actually, he is Francis Ford. He's John Ford's elder brother. And at the time, 1919, he was more important than his brother, who was just a beginner, actually, on his own crew. And just to show you how transient fame is, because by the end of the 1920s, poor Francis Ford was nobody. He became, a character actor, while his brother had become, a great director. Just to show you how transient fame is for directors in those days. On the West Coast, Maurice continued to make great adaptations. So he adapted Treasure Island. I mean, the film was praised to the sky in the press. Unfortunately, the film is lost. By the way, this is one of Lon Chaney's first pictures. In 1920, he put into production The Last of the Mohicans, which was really one of his greatest financial and critical success. I mean, the film really earned a lot of money to the company. And everybody said it was a film, worth to put in a museum, even in those days, just to show you how important it was. So as you can see, the film was co-directed with Clarence Brown because he hurt himself during the shooting. Unfortunately for him, it was a great time of productivity during all those years, but it's going to be much more difficult in the future because the company he had formed with various other directors actually went bankrupt. This is the time when the majors are going to be formed and directors are going to lose, their artistic control over their pictures. This is a bit what happened when he was making Lorna Doone in 1922. As you can see, his name is still, in big letters underneath the title on this advert, but that's not going to last. And during the shooting, actually, the company went bankrupt and they managed to finish the film only because Thomas Harper Hines, rescued the production. And this is also during that picture that he lost Clarence Brown, who left it. So the film is definitely not as good as the previous production. Nevertheless, it contains some really impressive sequences, and we're going to watch one of them, when the heroine is pursued by bandits just by the sea. Clip number 7, Lorna Doone. During the rest of the 20s, Maurice became a hired director for various companies. And sometimes he was doing just, commercial stuff, and he had lost really all artistic control. But once in a while, he managed to make a really interesting pictures. And this is one. This is one picture that Jacques Tourneur actually loved a lot. The Isle of Lost Ships. Sounds like a Jules Verne novel, it's the this isle is actually made up of shipwrecks in the middle of the Sargasso Sea. And a group of people are stranded on this island, and to escape, they actually made a submarine. I mean, that sounds crazy, but unfortunately, we cannot watch that picture. It's lost. Jacques Tourneur started working with his father in 1923 as second assistant. So he really learned his trade completely with his father. And in 1925, Maurice bought a 16mm Kodak camera, one of the very first 16mm camera. And they decided to shoot home movies where, you shoot his dogs and, his house and various things like that. But not only that, I found an interesting sequence which is edited, where you can see he's probably teaching his son how to shoot a sequence and how to edit it. This is some kind of a small slapstick comedy with father and son playing the lead. So we're going to watch this clip. This is the Maurice and Jacques in Los Angeles in 1925, clip number 8. Maurice and Jacques in Los Angeles. So there's Maurice about to scratch a match on his car. Jacques coming out and then telling his father off. And then it turns into some kind of a slapstick. By 1926, we're reaching the end of Maurice's career in Hollywood. He's making Old Loves and New, which is, some kind of an ersatz of the Chic. Is Valentino, who had been such a success that every studio wants to try, to make this kind of picture. And as you can see, if you look carefully, actually, Maurice's name is here, it's in tiny character, just to show you how he's gone down the ladder. And the film was actually, the good news is, well, let's say it's a blessing in disguise. The film was called really horrid, so it's lost, or it's probably just as well. But I've got some good news for you. Actually, Maurice took his 16mm camera on the set, and we are going to be able to see him actually shooting the picture, directing the actress Barbara Bedford, and is interacting with his son, who was one of the assistants on the set. This is clip number 9, Old Loves and New. 1926 picture. There's Maurice in the middle here with a dark hat, smoking. His son Jacques beside him with an assistant. He's arranging the clothes of Barbara Bedford, who was the lead actress of the film. This is the film crew. Maurice, Barbara Bedford. Maurice sitting. Maurice and Jacques. Camels. Yeah, of course, it's the chic. Sharing a cigarette. Another camera crew. Oh, Jacques is fetching some water. For his father. In 1926, Maurice had enough of this new system where the director was a mere employee in a studio, and he decided to leave America and to go back to Paris for good. When he arrived in France, funnily enough, he had the idea to make a film about aviators during World War I. And I've got to mention to you, obviously, that he didn't participate in the war in the least. So as a result, there was huge controversy, and the press was absolutely full of terrible articles like this one, calling it scandal how Maurice Tourneur was making money in America while the Frenchmen were being slaughtered in the trenches, could go back to France and make a film about World War I. This is a disgrace. And they mention here, as you see, insoumis de guerre, it means draft dodger. Obviously, he didn't participate to the war and he didn't reply to the call for mobilization. And the police started to be intrigued by this story and they investigated. And on the 24th of May, 1928, Maurice was arrested. And you can see here the map shot that was taken by French police. And he was told, well, you're an American, we cannot really arrest you, but we can expel you. So you have 8 days to leave the country. So Maurice decided to leave for Berlin. So why did he select Berlin? It's basically because in Germany at the time there was enough money to make a film, whereas, in other countries, film production was far more difficult. And he actually managed to make a film there. Das Schiff der verlorenen Menschen, the ship of lost men. And he called back Jacques, so he would join him in Berlin, and Jacques became his assistant and also his editor on the film. But what's interesting about that picture is the fact that the lead actress was called Marlene Dietrich. At the time, she was not famous. She had not met the Blue Angel yet. She was just, a young German actress. I'm not going to talk to you about Maurice's career in the talkies, but he was one of the few silent pioneers who managed the transition to sound without any problem. And he went on making pictures until 1948. And why I'm showing you this picture is because this picture of La Main du Diable, Devil's Hand, is actually a film made for the German company Continental Film in 1942. But if you watch the picture, you'll be probably reminded of the kind of styler set that Maurice was using in 1918 when he was making the Bluebird. But nowadays, everybody who sees La Main du Diable always talks about German expressionism, whereas in fact, actually, Maurice predates that, and that's his own style set, pre-expressionism. Just keep that in mind. And now, just to summarize, what is Maurice posterity nowadays? Well, in France, he's considered some kind of an old craftsman. I mean, most people have forgotten completely about his silent career in America. Whereas in America, he's got 4 pictures on the National Film Registry, which is quite impressive. I mean, his son Jacques only has 2. And the 4 pictures which are on this list are Wishing Ring, Poor Little Rich Girl, Bluebird, and Last of the Mohicans. Even his son has got only 2 films on this list, just to show you how impressive it is. And I've selected this nice little picture, to finish the talk, because it's a gag picture, taken on the set of The Christian, a 1922 film. And Maurice is holding, the end title card, while the cinematographer Charles Van Enger is taking a shot, while the heroine and the hero are having a kiss, some kind of a happy end. Well, in actual fact, the film didn't finish like that. It was actually very tragic, just to show you that Maurice still had some sense of humor. Well, I hope I've been able to interest you in the life of Maurice. And now I want to thank various people, who were very helpful for this talk. And first of all, Kevin Brownlow and the various archive who provided some of the images. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Christine Leteux. What such a wonderful treasure trove of stills and images and clips, and even the home movies. Wonderful, and it's so tantalizing that some of the films are lost, and such a shame, as you say. I'm so grateful to you for your insights and your pointers on to what to look out for when we're watching Tourneur's films, and we can really all appreciate how groundbreaking he was. Thank you all of the audience for joining us at this talk, and if you want to read any of Christine's works in translation, do consider supporting your local bookshop or indeed the Bowness bookseller, Inkspot and Silverleaf. This conversation has been recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, where you can rewatch at your leisure. Please tell your friends, share widely. And our next online talk will be with the wonderful curators at the Library of Congress Moving Image section, who will share with us a programme created especially for HipFest, all about dogs in silent film. See you soon.